Anyway, in the previous video, I mentioned all the tribes that were captured by the Spanish at one time or another and sold. But they weren't just sold to the West Indies, they were sold to the burgeoning plantation culture in South Carolina. Quote, the Indian slave trade in the Carolinas with the southern ports as centers rapidly took on all the characteristics of the African slave trade. Charleston and Savannah quickly became centers of North American commercial slavery. In the latter part of the 17th century, that's the 1600s, North American nations throughout the South were played against each other in an orgy of slave dealing that decimated entire peoples. The Indian slave trade in the Carolinas with these southern ports as their centers rapidly took on all the characteristics of the African slave trade. The Carolinians, that's the white people, white settlers, formed an alliance with coastal native groups, armed them, and encouraged them to make war on weaker tribes deeper in the Carolina interior. By the late years of the 17th century, caravans of Indian slaves were making their way from the Carolina backcountry to forts on the coast, just as caravans of African slaves were doing on the African continent. Once the Charleston captives were loaded on ships for the Middle Passage to the West Indies or other colonies, such as New Amsterdam, which became New York, or New England. Many of the Indian slaves were kept at home and worked on the plantations of South Carolina. By 1708, the number of Indian slaves in the Carolinas was nearly half that of the African slaves. See, that's what I tell people. To be black, so-called black, Negro colored in America means you have a root in the slave plantation culture of the South. It does not mean that you are African. It does not mean that you are African. It means that you are a slave. The first slaves were Indians. Africans were added to it. According to an Emory University study I saw, up through 1810, 200,000 Africans have been imported to the United States of America. We know that millions were sent to the Caribbean and to South America, but not that many comparatively have been sent to the United States of America. They banned the importation of Africans to the United States of America in 1808. 1807 was ratified by Congress in 1808. That's more than 50 years before the Civil War. So what you're saying is there's two generations of enslaved people in the United States of America in 1865 that have no memory of Africa. Okay? There were people, there was contraband early on, but, not as many as there were native Indians. As early as 1681, a permit was issued for the export of two Cherokee slaves from Charleston. By 1693, Cherokee had become objects of the slave trade to the extent that a tribal delegation was sent to the royal governor of South Carolina to protect the Cherokee from Congaree, Catawba, that's where I live, and Savannah slave catchers. In 1705, the Cherokee accused the colonial governor of granting commissions to slave catchers to set upon, assault, kill, destroy, and take captive Cherokee citizens to be sold into slavery for his and their profit. The Cherokee slave trade was so serious that it had, by the early half of the 18th century, eclipsed the trade for furs and skins and had become the primary source of commerce between the English and the people of South Carolina. That's Indian slavery. That's not African slavery. That is Indian slavery. And when was that? In South Carolina, by the early half of the 18th century. That's the 1700s. That's right before the Revolutionary War. It had eclipsed the trade for furs and skins. It was the primary source of commerce in South Carolina. That is Indian slavery, not African slavery. You keep telling me that these Geechee-Gullah cultures are an import of Africans, when I know there's a brother, I'll try to remember his name next time, who keeps saying that they're not African. He's from that not Savannah, but Charleston area. He's got videos on YouTube. His name's Chief something. He says, I'm a Yuchi. He is not Geechee. I mean, you might call him Geechee, but Geechee is not African. See, we think all Aboriginal cultures come from Africa and were imported here. No, 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 no. The melanated people here provided a lot of that culture. Okay? 1525, Giovanni Verrazano made a voyage to the Cape Fear River in North Carolina on commission from King Francis of France. And the first people he met was a tribe that he described as black like Ethiopians and dark, not unlike Ethiopians. It's a trick.